Hello, everyone. Welcome to CS Presents, a series of nearly weekly inspirational and educational webinars, we hope, from creative professionals around the world. Couple items of business here right up front. You can ask questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please don't put your questions in the comments. Use that nifty Q&A button. Couple of thank yous here. Thank you to Sigma on the Cine side, also the photo folks, as well as Creative Solutions for making this happen. If you don't know, you probably do. Creative Solutions is made up of Teradek, Small HD, and Wooden Camera. So thank you to all the above for supporting this stream. And especially, please remember, if you like content like this, if you want to see more content, please subscribe to Teradek on YouTube. Okay. Let's dive in. My name is Graham Sheldon. I am a producer and director of photography. And before I intro Paul here and a little bit more about myself, this is called Feature Films 101, Indie Filmmaking from the Script to Distribution. I'm very excited about this, honestly, because I think we talk generally about indie film, but today we have a good test case. We have a successful indie film that went all the way from script through distribution by way of South by Southwest, a premier film festival. And we're going to use that film, Miss Whitelight, as a lens to discuss indie filmmaking as a whole. We're going to try to squeeze it all into an hour to 75 minutes, somewhere in there. So let's get started. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. So I'm going to intro Paul here. Paul's film, Miss Whitelight, starring Judith Light, John Ortiz, and Roberta Colindres, premiered at the 2019 South by Southwest Film Festival, released just a few weeks ago, early October. He also wrote and directed The Good Catholic, starring Danny Glover and John C. McGinley. He also wrote the film Walter, starring Academy Award-nominated actors William H. Macy and Virginia Madsen, as well as Justin Kirk, Nev Campbell, and Jim Gaffigan. Also Andy West, a mutual friend of ours. And he's currently in post on another feature called So Cold the River. A bit about me. I am a producer DP, as I mentioned. Past credits, there's a little bit of overlap here. Good Catholic, I produced. I worked on a film called Dry Blood. American Hot Seat, Mind Like Stillwater, television and digital projects for NBC, TLC, Vice, ITV, Disney, Ubisoft, Nerdist, BBC, Lucasfilm, 2K Games, and a few others on my end. So as I said, we're going to use the film Miss Whitelight as a lens to explore indie filmmaking as a whole. I'm going to tackle camera side stuff, business side stuff, including things like fundraising, distribution, a little bit of legal sprinkled on top. Paul's going to tackle all the writer directory related things, and there could be some overlap. So before we get started here, Michael, if you don't mind, I'd like to play just about a minute or so of the Miss Whitelight trailer, just so people get a sense of the film. So we're going to do that right now.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Goodbye, Pearl. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss.
What the hell is this?
No. God never gives you more than you can handle. So, yeah.
We should get a website
Why?
to help solidify our brand.
We don't have a brand.
Not yet, but with a website.
Dad,
Why are you here?
this is what I do.
You creep out dying girls?
Are you creeped out?
Not creeped out.
My urine looks like iced tea. Looks like a fresh batch of Lipton.
Thank you for that.
Cordova and Cordova Mortality Solutions.
Incorporated. Well, technically, we're an LLC.
All right, there it is. So that's about, I don't know, 60 seconds or so of Miss Whitelight. God, Judith Light in any scene brings like a gravitas and charisma that I can't handle. She's great. So first off, as I was mentioning, I think Miss Whitelight makes for a great case study, again, because it, money was raised, a script was written, a thing was made, it went to a premiere film festival, and then it got out there into the world. But first, I want to start at the natural beginning, right? Which is the story. So, Paul, making a commercial thing is kind of a dirty word, but do you consider how commercial, whatever that means, a thing could be when you start putting pen to digital paper right at the beginning, or are you just writing purely just a great story and whatever happens, happens?
I really don't think I have much to offer a project if I'm trying to do something that isn't what I naturally am going to do with it anyways. So I just try to write what I think is the best version of that movie, not really thinking about how to sell it or what the market wants at the moment. I mean, obviously, if I was thinking about what the market would want, I don't know, I'd be doing comedic films about death. So I think, honestly, I think about the actors, and I think is what I'm writing something an actor would want to play, because at the end of the day, that's how you build a project. It's getting people to sign on. And I think, is it something an actor would be interested in doing? And that's all I really think about during the writing process.
Okay. So, I mean, that sort of naturally leads into casting. A lot of people get caught up in the idea that, there's a series of things you do to make a movie. I don't know if you agree with this, Paul, but in my mind, it's all really sort of jumbled together. You're writing with actors in mind. Maybe you know them. Maybe you've worked with them in the past. Maybe you're working with a casting director. Maybe you're already reaching out to a producer just at the outline stage. All of that stuff in the beginning is very often sort of squished together. It's not just a script, it's brought out to multiple different people like it is in the studio world, for example. So let's talk about casting, though, before I dive into fundraising a little bit. So are you thinking of like 10 to 12 people you want for X role, and then one character is you live or die if you don't get this person, the movie dies? How do you conceptually think about casting from the writer-director perspective? Because I have an idea about it for producing, but what are your thoughts on that?
While writing, unless, I've done some movies where at times certain people have been kind of precast, like someone I know.
Sure.
Never a famous person precast, but like if someone I know is going to be playing a role, I could write specifically for them. But in general, I don't write for specific actors hoping, if we don't get Anne Hathaway, then this role won't make any sense. And once you're done, I mean, when you go to a casting director, the first thing they ask for you to do, and it sounds very brutal and not magical, but this is literally the process, is they will ask you to make a tiered system of actors you would like for that role. And they're talking like, if you give them 30 names, they'd prefer 60. Sure. If they want a big variety just to kind of get an idea of the type of person you're thinking about. And the more focused you are, I think it helps them better understand what you're looking for. If you just throw a bunch of famous people's names on the list, then they're like, okay, you're just hunting a star, which is still useful information.
Which is a valid thing to ask for. And let me also be
absolutely
clear, at this point, this tiered list of actors is something that you never want to share nor tweet out at any point.
and it's funny that the tiered list can mean different things to a different director anyways. Like, oftentimes I'm sending this tiered list where my top tier are all people that are actors that I want the most. And the producers are like, I love all those actors, but like all of your like bigger names are down on like your third tier. Because, I don't rank them by, I think this person's the most famous or the most likely to get us funding. I rank it more like who I want the most. And then the casting director, the producer, myself, all kind of try to find common ground on what serves everyone's needs, or who you should go to first.
Right. Before we go on with casting a little bit more, how do you add a producer to the project? How do you get people to read stuff and sign on? Is it all personal relationships? Are you looking for producers with a track record having made a similar thing? What's that process look like for you?
It's different every time and for everyone. When you like, I live in the middle of Indiana, and I've not spent a ton of time out in LA. I go out there for trips, for work trips, but I've made all of my films in the state of Indiana too. So my network is very different than my network would be if I was, repped at CAA and was piped in out there. And so the process for me has very much been, I need to find a producer who is, it's a chicken and egg thing. Sometimes it's the script gets a producer excited and they're going to like go and take this out. And other times it's producers looking for a good script in a budget range, and you hand that to them and that solves that problem. But you're really just looking for someone who is willing to, because what I am not is someone who's going to take a script and then spend 3 months chasing down every single contact I have to see if I can find people to put money into a film. That's just not what I do. It's not the type of network that I build up. That's that to me is a very specifically a producer's job.
Yeah,
So
or a
I'm
manager or agent, some combination. Yes, it's not understood.
And I'm looking for people who are passionate enough about doing the thing that I've written, that they're going to run off and do that. That's who I'm going to trust to do it. It's not going to be the person that talks the biggest game or the person that's the most connected. It's going to be the person that's like, I need this to go.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stop until it does. And I've done this enough times now that you could start to really spot it. Anytime you have these relationships, any one conversation, any one cup of coffee, someone could sound really into it, but you really start to see, are they their own driving force, or are you leading the project? And if I'm leading the producer, I know the movie's not going to get made. This is not going to get made.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, we all have people in our networks, friends, colleagues that are those kinds of people that are sort of internally driven, that have that sort of energy wheel spinning within them constantly. And those are the people that you want to hang on to, especially at the start of making an indie film. You want to find multiple hyphenate people. Paul's a writer, director. I am a DP/producer. There's a reason for that, is because we understand multiple sides of the filmmaking process. And what we don't understand, we surround ourselves with brilliant people who know what they're doing. And look, I'm always about defraying risk, especially during the fundraising stage, which I'll get to in a moment. What is one way to defray risk? Bring people onto a team, onto a film package with a history of having made successful stuff like X. But that's very hard, right? Usually you maybe don't, when you're starting off, have a history of making things like that. So if you don't have that, find people around you that are at least driven, like what Paul's talking about. Find people that are willing to get in the trenches, so to speak, to get muddy, to get stuff done. Paul, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk about fundraising here for just a second, because this is a question that I see over and over again on just your average filmmaking group on Facebook. And I'm hoping to put some of these misconceptions to rest real quick here. So for the next 2 minutes, we're going to talk about fundraising. Again, it's all about defraying risk, and it's about believing in your project, right? So investors are people that care where their money goes. Very rarely is there just a rich person that's just going to throw money into a thing. The first thing that I try to do is have a good package, a good group of people that are intelligent, that look like they can execute on a thing. In this case, right, maybe it's just Paul and myself. I've made maybe a half dozen movies at this point. Paul's a bunch of movies in. So at this point, we're kind of a known quantity. But there's something to be said for bringing on an executive producer in kind of a consulting role that maybe has a huge credit. I mean, for example, on Good Catholic, we had an EP that had a history of making just sort of famous cult classic films. And I want to be clear too, that you would be surprised in both casting and then when reaching out to known quantity type people, who will pick up the phone. If Paul writes a good script and people start reading it, there's an energy that comes from that. And you would be surprised who will sign on to a project. So our first movie together, we, got Danny Glover, Lethal Weapon. I mean, just an absolutely huge name. John C. McGinley too, from Scrubs. And once you sort of have those people attached, everything kind of falls into place. So just basically, you're going to want a pitch document. A good pitch document has a couple things in it and again, there's no right way or wrong way to make indie films. This is just things that I've done that I think work. It should have a couple things: log line, summary of the story. It should have key cast, as many that potentially exist, as many attachments as you have at whatever point the project's in. And then of course, key crew members. Is it a horror movie? Has your DP shot a horror movie, et cetera, right? You're trying to remove any questions that potential investors might have in their minds, right? Because they don't want to look for glaring gaps in your strategy. A lot of people talk about business plans and things like that. I'm less interested in that from an investor perspective, as long as you have an answer to every single possible question. That's a bit of a cliche, but if you've ever seen one of those popular shows where people pitch things to other people, it's all the same. Think about that. You're trying to get a product made. Who are the people in your life that will give you money? This is how I look at this. It's kind of a nexus of different people. There's this old joke that dentists give a lot of money to indie films. That's a joke because it's absolutely true, because they have disposable income. So there's kind of a nexus of people that I looked for in the early days before you're reaching out to more established production companies. Look for people that have a pattern of investing in the arts. It doesn't have to be film. It can be theater, concert series, whatever. Look for people that have a vested interest in you succeeding as a filmmaker. And then look for people who are independently wealthy and that are in your circles, i.e. dentists. If you're able to create a nexus of a person that is already investing in the arts, is a dentist, and loves you, that person should be honestly an easy yes, as long as you can prove that their money is just not going to go poof into midair. In the past, foreign pre-sales, you were able to sell territories in advance of the film being made on the strength of the cast. For example, perhaps Danny Glover's a big deal in Hungary. Sometimes you can get $100,000 by selling Hungary as a country up front by working with a foreign sales agent. That is less common. Of course, tax incentives, obviously a big one. I'm a huge believer in tax incentives. They all work a little differently. It's a different percentage of your budget. Keep in mind that there are often things attached to that. For example, 90% of your above line or below line people might have to be locals. So recognize that if you're filming in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, that could actually have a detrimental effect on the overall project. Okay, there you go. That's fundraising in 2 minutes. There's going to be a lot of follow-up questions, I'm sure. Feel free to reach out to either of us on social about any of this. And then I have a few questions here I'm going to tackle before we go back to casting Paul. Paul, what are some of the missteps you made when you were a new writer? It was a good one.
Oh, I mean, the biggest misstep there's new writer as in starting writing screenplays for the first time, and new writer as the movie's in production for the first time. Those are two different versions of being a new writer. So as a new just writer in general, someone that's just getting into screenwriting, the biggest mistake that you make is it's one of two things. You can abandon things too early, which is a problem that some people have. They just, you run into a problem, which guess what? You're going to run into a problem. If you're writing something worth anything, you're going to run into a problem hopefully every day. That means you're writing and you're moving forward. If you're not running into any problems story-wise, then I imagine you're missing something in your story. But the first thing is abandoning stuff too soon, which is a common thing. Just bail when it gets tough. And because every unwritten idea is perfect. It only gets screwed up when you start to type about it. But the real issue is when you hit a real problem in your story, but in your head, you've set a date, like I'm going to have 90 pages by the end of December, and I got to do my 10 pages a week, or there's no chance, or 15 pages a week, whatever it is. And you just plow through and you build this whole thing on an awful foundation. I do believe in the vomit draft. That's fine. But if you know something is fundamentally wrong with your story, like your character has changed who they are just out of the blue, and you found your story on page 40, I can't tell you how many times I've wasted months just building off of that to say I was on pace, and then realize I got to go back to page 12. I made a huge mistake that I knew in my gut, and I could have just, I could have done that on page 13, and I went all the way to page 100 before doing that. So, but that's just experience too. Like, you're going to start to be able to see those sorts of problems ahead of time the more you write. I guess if you're starting out, if you're doing anything, even if you're making mistakes, you're writing, and that's probably all that you need to be doing at that point.
Here's a quick one just for me. At what point is the script ready to show others in your mind? Is that sort of a nebulous line that goes all over the place, or depends on your relationship with the person? Or,
I mean, always and never in my mind. I don't like, I'm somebody that goes back as I write. Like I can't move forward if I think something's wrong earlier in the script. So when I finish a draft, if you ask me 24 hours from the day that I finish it, I will always say it's ready, it's done. Everybody should see this. And as time goes on, I will just see problems with it. So it's this whole if you're sitting with it and you have gaps of time between anyone seeing it, you could go back and make it better. But I don't, no one will know I even have a script done until I think it's ready to be seen. There's nothing that bothers me more outside of like a writing workshop environment where someone sends me a script asking for notes and
a million typos.
Or I mean, a million typos, but also sometimes you're halfway through reading their script and they send a new version. I'm just like, no, man.
Yeah.
You should have, if you knew, like, or I know the third act's terrible, but will you read this? It's like, well, why don't you send it to me when you think the third act's okay? I mean, unless you really do need my help to get you through that. Oftentimes it's just, you're only going to get so many reads from so many people. Usually it's one if you're lucky to get a read from someone. Don't waste it.
Yeah. Can I just to jump off that for a second too, I'm going to also answer, Kit Carter has a question here at the same time. So I'm going to try to tackle both. There's a reason that I read all of the .pdfs that Paul Shoulberg sends me, because he has a history of sending me not a million different drafts that confuse me. I know I'm going to get a quality thing. You know, I'm never going to have wasted my time. So that's the reputation that you want to have with prospective indie producers. You don't want to ever be in the spot. Or honestly, can I be honest for a second? I am sent dozens of scripts, dozens. It's really important that we start off on a good foot. I just don't have the bandwidth to read everything. Kit Carter asks, if you don't already have a connection with a possible producer, how do you find one? Well, Kit, you know one right now. They just put all of my contact information into the chat. I know other people. Maybe I don't make a thing that's like the thing that you have in your pocket, but I know other people as well. Also, everyone's on social media. Honestly, I mean, don't get too hung up on like, how do I reach these people? I think honestly, everyone is available to be reached. I look at it like a numbers game. There's somebody on the planet that wants to make this with you. There's just, 6-ish billion people that you got to go through first. But if you think about it like that, there's a yes at the end of those 300 emails that you're going to send, right? It's just a numbers game. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to tackle a few of these in a second. But Paul, back to casting for a moment. One of the reasons from my perspective that cast is so important, this is a little bit of a bummer, right? Because we all just want like the best actor to win. So many things are dependent on the quality of the cast, from fundraising all the way through distribution. And I use the word quality with quotes around it. The quality of the actor in the eyes of the public matters a lot. Things have been sold based on the cast alone without reading the logline or a paragraph. It's just a real bummer about the industry, but it's the truth. So there's a few things that on Walter, actually, Paul, you did a really cool thing with William H. Macy. It was a low time commitment kind of gig, right? He needed to be on set a couple days. Right. And it meant that you have a name like William H. Macy in your film. Maybe we don't talk about him specifically, but do you have a perspective on that? Writing a character that could be a quote name?
Sure. Also, I mean, when that went into production in 2013, and that was a time where everyone wasn't on a TV show, although he was on a TV show at that point. Shameless was already running by then. But there was a window where actors still were like, I'm a film actor. I want to do films. And so there was a bit of a cachet to like being to making offers on an independent film. That now it's become more of a niche market, the indie film market. So I've watched as I've done films over the years that like it's a film and people are like, I want a Netflix show. What are you talking about? Like more people will see that. But so that was in our favor for sure at the time. But the best bet, and we also shot Walter in LA, which means no one has to, like, everyone can stay at their house and just drive to work. That's a huge deal if you're shooting in the town where they live. That's big, but yes, William H. Macy, it was 2 days of shooting.
There you go.
And if you work out your schedule around not what makes the most sense for production, but what's most favorable for your biggest names. And it's so much easier to get someone on a 2-day thing than if they, it's like 7 days spread out, 7 days of shooting spread out over 3 weeks of production. It just becomes harder and harder to get those people. So you want to try to, if you're aiming for a bigger name on a small movie, you want to condense their stuff into the fewest production days possible. It'll be way more attractive to them. And the cutoff really is with travel and everything. And it's been travel for me in the films I've directed out in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
You really want the whole process. If it all stays within a work week, 6 days roughly, if they could get to you, shoot their scenes, and get home all within a week, it's kind of all the same, whether it's 1 day, 3 days, whatever. That's sort of the thing. When you spill into the next week, that's a week they could have been working on something that, if you're in my situation, would have paid them more than my film.
Yeah. I hope everyone's listening to this. This is really key, and this is something that I don't see people thinking about a lot, is recognize the time commitment of X movie star you would like on your film. Because this, the methodology that Paul just went over has paid off for us and me on other projects over and over and over again. These are people too. Fit them in a work week so they can spend the weekend with their kids. Okay, so I have a question here from Deborah R. Do you have to have an agent or manager to get your script to a producer? Also, how do you protect your script from being used without your permission? So I'll take the copyright WJ Mark side of that, Paul, but do you want to take that first one? Do you need an agent or a manager to make movies?
I've written and directed 3 features in the last 4.5 years. I think 5.5 years. The January 2016, we made The Good Catholic. I've since made Miss White Light and So Cold the River.
And you're with WME or ICM or?
Yeah, still don't have an agent. Honestly, I've met with people, but it has not been like a major goal. I've literally been too busy making movies to be doing the chasing down agents thing. So it's, if that tells you anything, that's your answer. An agent, I mean, what I'm not is like getting sweet, like rewriting gigs on Pixar films or something like that. Like that's what I've been making films. I'm not piped into those secret well-paying jobs for writers that you really do need representation just to get into those rooms to pitch on. So the agent will get you much better legal protection and payment. But as far as getting your stuff made, it's nice to have that agent name. But honestly, especially in the early phase when people are it's the wild, wild west and you got to be super flexible. I've seen agents actually keep their clients from getting things made because they screw it up.
100%. I've worked with actors in the past who were not represented, became represented, and it became a harder thing to book them, even though that they have an amazing history of making things literally with me. So be careful if you're putting up a wall for no reason through your representation. You have a massive problem. So you need to keep that line of communication open with your manager, with your agent. Just be very clear about the expectations if that's something you want. Or, as Paul just pointed out, just go make things. You can make features without working with these types of people. The traditional Hollywood gatekeeper system is sort of crumbling. No one's even in buildings anymore, honestly, in LA. Everyone's working from home, doing things over Zoom. We create these gatekeeping systems, honestly, down to jargon on set, just to be exclusionary, just to make it seem like filmmaking is a harder thing than it really is. What's a C-47? It's a clothespin. What's a Maver clamp? It's just a clamp. Cardellini's. We do that to make it harder for brand new people to walk onto film sets so we can hold on to our jobs. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for a second. How do you protect your script from being used without your permission? I would do 2 things. I would get a WGA mark. It's like $40, right, Paul? Whatever it is. And then, you could go through Library of Congress, also an easy portal. You can even pay more, 120, and have like an agency do it for you. Any other things you would do to protect your ideas, Paul, other than that?
Well, I would actually say...
or am I completely wrong? That's okay too.
Truthfully, the amount of scripts that are stolen from unknown writers is probably equivalent to the amount of times there's actually been voter fraud, in the sense that they would much rather get your script, you unknown person, and give you scale, buy you out and own it and do whatever they want with it, than steal it. It'd be so much cheaper if they want to make your thing. It's easier to pay off an unknown writer than it is to try to rip them off. You're not going to go make a $40-50 million film off of a script you stole from somebody who doesn't have an agent. And I think that the more inexperienced I was as a writer, the more obsessively protective I was of my scripts.
Right.
I had a writer, I'll never forget, I had a writer come up to me and say, hey, I would love for you to read my script. We knew each other through a mutual connection, so I was not like creeped out by the approach, and they're like, it'd be a huge honor if you could just read it and just give me your thoughts. And I was like, as every writer that's being asked to read someone else's script that they don't know that well, you're like, oh, okay, fine. And then the next day he sent me an NDA, and I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
You're good. And it's just like,
oh yeah,
it just doesn't like, if you ever listen to the Script Notes podcast with Craig Mazin and John August, they talk about the whole, like, this stuff just doesn't get stolen that often. It really, ideas you can't protect. If you have an idea that is so unique, that like you might want to be more protective about who you send that script out to. Like if it's just a concept that like something like the Sixth Sense before there was the Sixth Sense, whereas like, it's all about the idea and the hook. But in general, I think that newer writers worry more about getting their script stolen than having a script that somebody would want to steal.
100%. There's a reason that like Armageddon and Deep Impact come out in the same year. It's because it's an asteroid hitting Earth is not a unique thing. Both movies very good, but that stuff happens all of the time, and nobody's stealing anything from anybody else. Okay, so I have a question here from Zach Lynn. When writers reach out to you as a producer, what makes a good first impression? What red flags? Okay, so Paul already said this. If I'm getting sent an NDA, that just bums me out a little bit. I sign a lot of NDAs all the time, not usually for scripts, but for projects and things that haven't been released. Is it a red flag? You want to create as few barriers as possible for me to read your thing and to like it. And I'm not going to steal it. I have a history of not stealing things too. Maybe Google the producer you're sending it to, and if like 90 lawsuits pop up from the Hollywood Reporter, that might be a red flag for you just to send it to this person. Things that Zach, typos are a bummer for me. Like it just, if you don't care that much about spelling there correctly and using it correctly, then why am I going to, care?
Bad formatting, just like it doesn't look like a script. Like, I mean, it's got to look like a thing.
Yeah, that's another thing too, from the producer's perspective on a script, is it has to be a readable thing. There's a lot of movies that have been made that aren't that exciting necessarily on the page, but sort of come alive when you film it. The things that get made, I think, faster are ones that are just a good story. When you're sitting there and like the action makes sense and you can visualize it and it's not, crazy and it's just fun. Like I want to be entertained by a good story. I don't know. Maybe Paul, do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, don't look for outliers to justify your lack of doing the things that are professional. Don't be like, well, James Cameron wrote a script on a side of a coffee mug with a Sharpie and it was just symbols and it got made. It's like, okay, well, that wasn't his first script. So if you like, if you're trying to get your whole project made on the basis of your script, the script's got to be great. It just does. That means from the way if you use fade in or not the software, but literally the term. If the way you write your montages or the way you transition, all the little choices you make, that it's all showing the reader that you have control or you don't have control of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so every element, when I first started writing scripts, I only cared about dialogue. And I thought that action was like, they're going to shoot it the way they shoot it. So he picks up the gun and shoots the guy. That's going to they're going to shoot it. Why am I going to describe it? The director's going to do whatever they want. But that's not true. if the moment's important when he picks up the gun, it better feel that way on the page. Better pace out the way, better force you to, if it's going to have an impact, it's got to have an impact on the page. And if you're missing that, you cannot, especially again, if you're famous and you have a reputation for writing very bland scripts that shoot really well, that's fine. But if you don't have that, you got to make it as good as possible. Every little thing, and man, your first 5 to 10 pages better be great. Yeah, because that is when you're going to lose your reader. They will not pour over something. I mean, Graham, when you read a script, how long does it take you to give up on a script when you know you can give up? Like,
honestly, 5 to 10 pages. I mean, you just kind of,
that to me, that seems long. I feel like in 2 pages,
yeah. I mean, look, 3 to 5 probably more realistically for me, but yeah, the best stuff, I'm already like into it. And there's something about it. It's like the dialogue, or it's the action, or it's the character development, or it's the lack of character development, or it's just doing something, I just want to know more, and if you just have whatever that is, then yeah, that's absolutely a problem. Okay, so James, I promise I'm going to actually get to your question at the end. I want to stay kind of in like normal indie film order. So you're asking kind of a distribution question, so I'll hit that at the end. So again, just a friendly reminder, if you're watching, use the Q&A button for questions. I'm okay jumping back for casting and money raising questions as well. But now I want to move into production, Paul. Okay, so you and I, we've spent a lot of time on sets together. How much, from the writer-director perspective, how much prep do you do? Do you like to know what every frame is sketched out on a little pad of paper? Do you like to leave yourself open for discoveries? How closely do you work with your DP? Let's talk about that early stage. Like you're just about to hit record on stuff like the week before, 2 weeks before.
It's been different for all 3 of my films, and it's been entirely based off of partially budget, but mostly inexperience. So on The Good Catholic, I think I had my DP in town for 10 days before we shot.
Yep.
I had a shot list that we discussed, but we weren't even able to get into every location, many locations. It was like we were in a room with like quasi overheads talking about stuff theoretically, which is not the way you want to do it. So, and on Miss White Light, I had about 14, 15 days where we did go to every location and we're able to talk through stuff, but it was still a lot more theoretical than I wanted to. Whereas by the time I got to So Cold the River, I did like 4 or 5 drafts of my shot list over months before it even got to the DP, before we had a DP on board. And then when I started working with her, we did many drafts of the shot list as if it was a script.
Right.
Like, and that to me is how I think it should be. And I think that you really want to be, she was on location with me for about 3 weeks leading up to the film. And, but so were a lot of other people. And the big mistake, and the thing that I will, even on that I wish I would have fixed, that I will always do from now on, you should have a week where you could go to all the locations. Again, everything's budget. Sure. It's all, but where you could go to every location with your DP and your production designer, and preferably your AD, before anyone else shows up. Because that's the most valuable time you have. Because once everyone's coming, you're just answering questions all day, and you're like trying to I just want more time with that DP. Yeah. And so I think getting that time at the beginning, before anyone shows up, I think is more crucial. And we had tons of phone calls, but it's never the same as standing in the place you're actually going to shoot, getting as much time as possible. There's never enough time to answer that question.
Now, I'm going to half answer a question from anonymous attendee here. To Graham, what do you do if in mid-production things are going really, really badly? So to go back to this 3-week, 1-week period, whatever it is prior to shooting, a goal as a producer is to have thought of everything already in advance. There's a reason that producers sitting in Video Village have this reputation for being kind of lazy. They're not maybe doing that much. It's because they've been working to an exhaustion level for multiple months prior to shooting, so that nothing can go really badly. This might be a little controversial, but I really want to be doing nothing while the movie is happening. The majority of my work should have happened prior to shooting. This is how I like to work. People have different takes on this, but I want to have answered all the questions in advance. Any hypothetical problems related to weather, I already have a backup plan. Any moments where we're in the water, I want to already know. Any moments where there's a helicopter landing or an explosion or if a VFX thing or a practical effect, I want to know everything about the entire process, which makes me a little bit annoying, but also I think hopefully a okay producer, is because I want to be in the weeds, in the trenches, and know as much as possible about every aspect of the production, because that's the job. And really, things mid-production should never be going, quote, really, really badly. But look, I mean, sometimes budget is what it is. You don't have any time to get in the location. You have to pivot on the fly. And then that's where I think my background in the camera departments and in other areas helps me, because I can go and I can get that exterior on a day where it's not snowing, so it matches the walk-up shot on the Steadicam. You know what I mean? Just get out there and do it. Do what you have to do so that things don't go really, really badly. You shouldn't be making big dramatic pivots mid-production. Jim, yeah, sorry, WGA registration mark is what I was referencing there. So if you Google WGA, you don't have to be in the Writers Guild to do that, but it's like $40. It's an extra layer of protection. It seems a little more, you know, of a solidified thing versus taking a photo of a newspaper, like a hostage style next to your script or something. It seems like a better way to go.
I will say on that note,
Yeah.
one thing that no one tells you, if you're going into production on an indie film and you're using SAG actors, you have to have the script copywritten, and that copyright can take sometimes 9 months to come through. So if you know you're going into production, get it copywritten early, because if you have to rush it, it could end up being like $300 to $500, which is fine on a $2 million film, but on a $400,000 film, like $300 to $500 is that's a big deal. It's a really big deal to have to burn on a last minute copyright.
100%. Shay Butler asked 2 questions. What is the sweet spot for both of you in terms of producing and or directing a film? Is it below 1 million, 1.5 million, etc.? For me, it's between 0 and 2 million is the sweet spot. And I look at it as you need to have this reminded me. One thing I wanted to mention in the pitch deck section of this is a lot of people put in something called comparable films, which actually bugs me a little bit, but they say my movie's kind of like X, an X movie, made $45 million. And it's a way for investors to be like, okay, so you're like Chipotle and they're trying to make it a known quantity and you want to open up a place that sells burritos. It doesn't really work like that, but people put that in pitch decks all the time. And I kind of skip that page and just kind of giggle to myself. It's not going to be like Rise of Skywalker numbers, or whatever they're comparing it to. I will say it's a red flag if you say, my movie is a lot like the first Raiders of, Lost Ark or whatever, or Last Crusade. That's not possible. Don't compare.
And we're making it for $222,000.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Be reasonable in your pitch documents. That's a huge red flag. If it just doesn't make sense, if you sound insane on the page, that's a huge red flag. So yeah, $1 to $2 million. It depends on what the thing is. Obviously, I think like the average documentary in Sundance is like 450 grand is the budget. Take a look at averages, but every production is different. The key thing is you want to make your money back. You don't get like a trophy if you spend the most money making a movie. You don't get anything for, be wary of movies where people are trying to put a ton of money in their pockets if they're above the line. Be very concerned about that stuff, dude. Talking about equity and creative points split for a second. Every movie is split up into 100 points. Half goes to equity investors and people that put in money. The other half go to creative people, right? So this is the kind of the Blumhouse model. We're going to pay you a little less to write and direct this film. We're going to give you more net points. If you're George Clooney or Tom Cruise, you get gross points on Mission Impossible. Those are much better, but net for our purposes. Be wary of that. If someone is only offering you points, no money, we all still have to pay rent, and indie films take 2 years to make on average anyway, 1 to 2 years. So money is an important thing, obviously. There's something I did early on. I did favored nations for everyone on the crew on a low budget indie, meaning everyone was making minimum wage. everyone, producer, same as grip, same as gaffer, same as whoever, right? And that's, I think, a good thing to just like, look, this is an indie film. No one's making any money. We're just doing this because we love doing it. I highly recommend that. That worked out really well on movie number one. Do you have any budget thoughts, Paul, from your perspective? Just put it all on the screen, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's different for every film.
Yeah.
I want to know that the budget needs to make sense for what the movie is. You look at the movie, you look at where it could fit, and does the budget make sense? Do I have enough money to do what I need to do? Does this look bloated for no reason?
Yes.
The bloated thing, I mean, if a budget is big, that doesn't mean it's bloated.
True.
But there are, I mean, really look out for certain producers take a cut of how many dollars they bring into the budget. And I've seen movies blow up by several $100,000 during filming, and that money was not needed. And that money dilutes everyone's points drastically. And people are just paying themselves to up the budget. So you have to really watch out for that. There is that whole, what if we get more money? What if we get more money? What if we did this? We get this person on board. Now we could get more money. Like, do you need the money to get to do what you need to do with the film? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you're under budget, if you're trying to make a movie at a certain level and your budget is below that level, you're also making the wrong movie. Or you're like, if you know you want something that's going to be like visually, like if I would have tried to shoot Good Catholic the way that we shot So Cold the River, and I'm not going to get into what any of the budgets for these things are, but there's a drastic difference.
One's a thriller, one's a romantic comedy. Just tossing that out there. We're not giving it away. We can't talk about So Cold anyway. So yeah.
But one like is visually very specific with shots that like we need time just to get this one wide. It's going to take like a big portion of the day to get all these elements to work out for us. Whereas with the Good Catholic, we just had time to
or whatever
cover, extras, huge spaces. With the Good Catholic, it was like most of my shot lists were like, close up, OTS, a 2, and then a wide, because that's how much time we had. And there are days where we didn't get all those for scenes. And you just need to know like what you're making. Does the budget line up? And if it feels right, and if you're looking around and saying, is there a massive inefficiency here? Is something other than the movie being taken into consideration with where things are going? And so I think as a director, producers often want nothing more than to have as few people involved with that line budget as possible. You just don't want a bunch of people chiming in. But I insist on being a part of making that line budget, even when I'm not a producer, because I know that if we're not getting this, I know where it went, or if I know we're not getting this because we just aren't a big enough movie to get that, it's a very different situation. So I know it lets you know where to fight and where you can move things around.
Well, and a good producer, Paul, will tell you, would you like X and here's the money consequences, or would you like, Y, this is what this will cost, right? Yep. It's presenting you with those. When you have to, as a writer director, find what the question is, that isn't your job. I don't think it is. But.
Right. And there's things like little things that add up, like, hey, this actor that is got some pretty good credits can come in and do this 3-line role for us. Mm-hmm. And it's like, great. But we still have to like make a deal with their agent to have like a first class round trip airfare and put them up in a certain type of hotel and do all this stuff. It's like, we sure, they worked for scale, but we still spent $6,500 to get something into a role that really we didn't need to. So these are the kind of things where like sometimes producers could be like, it'll look good on the IMDb, but you're sitting there going like, we need the Steadicam for another week. So this is just, that's the kind of stuff where if it's not going on screen, you just need to understand what's possible within a budget as a director. You must understand that, and so you can properly like wage your wars, because you're going to have to, because you're not going to have enough money. So you're going to have to fight for what you need. And the more you understand about a budget, about how it's coming together and what money you actually have, the better you're going to be prepared to get involved and not just let a producer who's doing their job but doesn't understand that if you would have gotten this day a steady cam as well, it would have that's a huge deal for the film. They might not know that. They might not think it matters, but you need to know.
So Eric V, I'm going to answer your question kind of at the same time while I touch on something Paul was saying here. So a budget is a creative, living, breathing document that tells everyone what your priorities are as a film. So when I read a budget, I can see what you care most about, right? Whether it's the SFX makeup, whether it's the quality of the cast, whatever it is, but it's a living, breathing document that tells a story. And if your budget doesn't tell a story, if it's based on another movie, it's not based in reality, I'm going to be able to tell that. What are your thoughts on some low budgets not being taken seriously by investors? This is a question from Eric. If I ask you questions, why does this cost this? Why does this cost that? If you have an answer for everything, fine. The movie costs $100,000 to make. That is what it is. It takes 9 shoot days. Maybe it's all in one room. I can be convinced of anything. And yes, there are some investors that will be scared off by the tiny number or whatever it is, but they're just not the right investors for your project. Some people will be. Again, just a numbers thing. There's a lot of dentists in North America.
And uncles.
and uncles. And yes, real estate mogul that you're slightly friends with on Facebook. Okay, let's talk about Video Village for a moment. So Paul, I've worked on movies with you where you have a chair, you're there with Scripty, you have a small HD 1703 color monitor in front of you. Then maybe when you're in the room or in this physical space, you have a 7-inch Bolt 703, and you're sort of walking around and you're seeing the space and you can see camera angles while you're a little closer to the actors. What is your rule of thumb when it comes to giving people access to monitors like that, or to just keeping people back so you can be at your creative best? Do you like Video Villages where it's just chock full of suits? Quotes.
Well, it's not. It's the thing is, on my films, it hasn't been suits. It's been very invested department heads that need to get access to the screen. I remember something that I think I thought would have been cool on Miss White Light.
Yep.
They got this huge monitor, and I was like, wow. I'm used to these smaller. There's like a really high end, huge monitor. I was like, this is great. Not so much, because guess what happens when you have a big monitor? You look back and you got an army of people, and you're like presenting your scenes to a crowd and
every day, at every moment.
Yeah, and I really learned after Miss White Light to prioritize as few people as possible. I need Scripty. It depends on the scene too. There's certain scenes where it's like, if it's a deep emotional acting scene, I'd like to pair off as many. But give me the handheld screen. Get me in the room if I can fit in there, and get no one in my ear. Scripty can come in between takes and talk to me, but I want no one. I want it just to be me and them. Yeah, I can somehow control the camera with the. I always feel like when I have the little
smaller
handheld, I always think I'm moving the camera because I know what the move's going to be, and so I look like I must look crazy from an outsider's point of view. But if I could get rid of more people just to get it as personal as possible, I would. But it should be Scripty at my side and quick access to the AD. But in general, I would prefer department heads having their own groupings of monitors, like hair, makeup, and wardrobe having one. And then I do not like people at Village. It changes the process, and you do not need somebody. I can't tell you how many times you're shooting a medium 2-shot just to get someone handing someone something, but you're shooting the whole scene because you don't know when you're going to need that. Right. It's all going to happen in close up, and then someone leans in, usually a producer. It's like, are you going to do a one where you see, a close room? It's like, well, we have 14 setups today. You're watching one. And yeah, right. You do know how this works, and it drives you crazy. And it just, the less people, the better, I think, for a director at that monitor.
A quick disclaimer, small HD monitors do not pan and tilt the camera, although the Cine 7 series and the Indie monitor, you can control the camera, internal menu settings. So that's
See, I think that would actually be a nightmare if I actually did have the ability. Like the DP would just be like,
well, that's too much power for Paul. So that's good.
Yes.
You want one of those ever. Okay, so there's another way to keep people away from the monitor, and that's using a device like a Serve Pro or a Cube 755. So, Paul, I've worked on movies with you where we've used a Serve Pro that just puts the image out of the camera into iOS or I think Android devices as well at this point, and just keeps people away from set, but they still feel like they're able to monitor the makeup or whichever department that they're in. And also, I mean, now there's a benefit, obviously, given the pandemic, to keeping people as far away as possible.
Sure.
You can even use the Cube series from Teradek to just send a feed wherever through Core. So, I mean, you just leave the, would you rather all the producers just stayed at home, Paul? Because there you go. You could do that with the Cube.
Until there's a problem. And then I need a room full of them to panic to.
Fair enough. Okay. And then I want to talk about, I'm going to hit a bunch of these questions here. I know some are piling up. I promise I will. Let's talk about communication with the camera department. So I've used directors' viewfinders with you on features before, including actually the Sigma FP. I've used the Sigma FP director's viewfinder mode as a communication tool with you, with the production design team, whatever it is, because with the Sigma FP, you can select your aspect ratio, use the actual lens that you're shooting the film with. In a lot of cases, just a Sigma Cine Prime, and then you can see what is actually in the shot. So a little tricky in current COVID times, but we would pass the viewfinder sort of back and forth so you can kind of see what the shot's going to be in reality versus the classic BTS photo of whatever this is. This isn't a real thing.
Right.
Yeah. So Paul, how do you like communicating specifically with the camera team, with the DP, with the operator? Maybe you never talked to the operator. What's your feeling about talking to camera?
If you've got the right DP, and I feel like I've to me found someone on this last film, So Called the River, someone that we just put so much work in beforehand that we were making the same movie from the day we got onto set. Yep. So it was more like, we're gonna do this shot now, the one that we've referenced 3,000 times. Right. And sometimes it's like, oh, we're doing the shot, and it's like we're naming a shot from another movie or a shot that we've got its own name for, or like we've talked so much as a common language. But I personally, I want, we're on the same page with what the shot she is setting up, and she calls me to the monitor and just says, is this what you're wanting? Actually, can we get tighter or whatever. And that's how I prefer to do it. If you've got a DP you trust, that's awesome. You can do it that way. If I'm sitting there while they're framing it up and I'm over their shoulder saying, no, this isn't even what we're trying to do, you're already in big trouble, I think. So I like to have them frame it up, get me to monitor, and then we kind of tweak from there.
It helps if you have a common frame of reference too, in terms of like past movies. I like communicating like this a lot, good, the bad, and the ugly. We're doing the spinny thing with the Steadicam person or whatever. It
right.
Helps. You have just a common understanding.
Oh yeah.
So
we would. I mean, with again, I'm going to reference the last DP that I worked with, Madeline. Her name's Madeline Kate Kahn. She's awesome. And Graham, I know you opt for her, and it was great. And she, months ahead of time, I again, the shot list that I'd done many drafts on, sent it to her. We talked about, she'd send me, after talking about it and getting on the same page, then she sends me thousands, and I don't say that lightly, I mean thousands of images in a Google Drive labeled by that wide shot from that scene you're talking about, or whatever, and going through, and it's like going to the eye doctor and saying, I like this, I don't like that, I like when this happens, I don't like that. And so she throw out all the stuff that I'm like, no, and the stuff that I'm drawn to, and then she refines that, and then we go back and forth. And by the time we get to set, she knows what type of depth of field I'm into. She knows like what type of wallpaper colors I like. Like she knows all of that stuff. I know what she likes, and we're you know, hitting it with like, we're making the same movie, and that just takes a ton of prep. And if you can do that, you should do that, because it like, that's how you know, like this is the first time I've been able to get on set and be like, every time things are getting framed up, I was like, yeah, that's what I pictured. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, preparation, you're hearing everybody out there, Paul, how much work goes into this. I mean, I spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking to people about a single VFX shot, because it really matters, because you don't want to have any questions open on the day. Yeah, it's so key to have that just common vocabulary, especially with the DP. Okay, so let's tackle a few questions here. Tom says, if you don't have any connection in the industry, how do you find someone to read your completed script? Social media, we kind of tackled that one a little bit. Check out whose films are at Sundance, whose films are at South by, Tribeca, you know, wherever. There's a ton of people out there making indie films. I mean, you know, Palm Springs Film Festival, there's a ton of great ones. Mostly all digital now, San Diego Film Festival, things like that. But these are producers with emails. They exist out there. I mean, they're not hiding. I'm not hiding. I have like an open contact form on my website, and it goes to me. You know, I did have someone pitch me a movie idea that I dropped cards on the floor of a Whole Foods once, though. So please don't do that. That freaks me out a little bit. Paul, if you don't mind, let's make this a quick minute answer here, just because I want to get into post and distribution. A lot of people curious about distribution. Steve asks, how much of any rehearsal were you able to do with actors prior to rolling? So table reads, blocking, anything like that? Just table reads?
Different actors, the people that come in for like those 3 or 4 days, you like with Judith Light, we were able to do like 2 3-hour sessions in a hotel room. She had like 4 or 5 days of shooting, and that's about as much as you're going to get for someone like Roberta in Miss White Light, who was in every scene. I think I was able to work with her for like 5 days, but you're paying for all of that, and it's not expected anymore. It used to be those whole like long rehearsal periods. That's the other thing. You need to be able to cast people that don't need 2 weeks of rehearsal to be good.
And this is an indie film. Indie film specific thing. In the studio environment, it's a different thing, but we're talking indie films here.
Yeah, it's not there. It's just, you're not going to have a lot of rehearsal time.
In indie films, in a way, you're casting what you want in that scene. You're not expecting them to show up and do something that is night and day different from what you've seen them do.
And you're not their acting coach. This is not theater. Right? Yes, it's not theater. It's if you're teaching that person how to be that character on set, you are in trouble. You could get lucky, but you really need to cast someone that in the audition, if they don't go anywhere from that audition, that's going to be good enough. They always bring way more, and they develop it, and it gets richer. But if you've got questions when you're seeing that tape, you really don't want to cast that person. Yep. You're not going to have time to fix it.
And it's a bummer, but you don't have time in indie film. You really don't. Okay, quick question here from Alan Copland about when you first start to budget your film, how many different budgets do you create? I mean, we were on version like 15 on this last thing I worked on. I don't know if that's a good answer, but everything is different. It should just change constantly. If it's not changing constantly, then you're not doing something right. You're not hiding anything from the investors. I mean, changing, I'm saying you usually have a pot of money, right? And you're just sticking the different dollars in different places. You shouldn't be wildly being 40% more than what we talked about, then 20% less, because that just looks sketchy. How to construct a pitch doc, resources to go to learn. I don't have a good answer for this one, honestly. If you have the things in there that I said you should have, logline, paragraph, crew plus attached cast, you're in a really good position. Give some true thought to, do you need a comparable films section? Because that's a little bit nebulous, as I mentioned in the past. Okay, a few of these are distribution. Paul, when directing, this is from Greg Palmer, when directing, how much, if any, suggestions for a scene do you want from other crew members? Oh yes, how much do you appreciate people in the corner raising their hand and being like, pan left?
Day of, it's
Never do that.
Yeah. I once on the Good Catholic there was a student PA. After we did this long one, are we crossing the street? There's traffic. It's this whole thing, and a steady cam shot. We get it, we nail it, and this guy comes up to me and is like, "Hey, so as a PA, are we allowed to suggest shots you should do?" And I'm not. It's a
honest question.
Yes, and for some reason, I was way more gracious than I feel like I probably am, and I just said, if we took everyone's questions, we wouldn't have time to shoot the thing. And in my head, I'm like, why is this happening? And so the next take, the steady came up to me and said, some kid walked up to me and said, tilt down at the end during the shot. And it was the same kid. So he was not on set again. So it's, in general, I know that there are directors that are like, I want to hear, if a group thinks we should go handheld, I want to hear about it. And I get it. And it's not a class thing or I don't want to hear from anyone in the makeup department about a shot. It just becomes, we've done all the work. Every department should know what you're doing and why. Those questions, I welcome those questions. The people that are prepared are asking you those questions at the right time. The people that are looking and being like, oh, you're doing this. If it's day of, you weren't paying attention the 3 weeks beforehand. You weren't you just showed up and you're asking questions. So the people that are paying attention and working hard can get those questions either to you directly or through their department head, if they're not a department head, early enough to have that addressed. And I welcome, but as it gets closer and closer to shooting, you've made your decisions, and you don't, on an indie film, you don't have time to just try something different halfway through the day.
And it feels like I'm legally required to say this too. This could have been a moment where you could have done the cliche director be a monster thing, but I want to be very clear. There is no room for being an a-hole on sets anywhere on the planet anymore. That might've been a fun thing like a decade ago. We only like working with people that we like working with. Okay. So tell everyone that. It just,
good luck working with anyone again if you're an asshole. It's not going to work.
Nope, it's not going to. Okay, I have a question from YouTube. I'm from Argentina. Hello from Argentina. And I have a short documentary I want to be shown in theaters so I can send it to a film festival. How can I achieve that? I don't remember the name. Film Freeway, are they still around? I just use one of those big aggregated film festival services online that's digital. I highly recommend that. It makes submissions easy. Just go ahead and do that. That's an easy one. And then you can send it to like 1 million film festivals at a time. Yeah. One thing about film festivals, if you truly don't have the budget to actually get pay that submission fee, they rely on that for a lot of their funding, but you can email them and you'd be surprised. If you just tell them like, look, we don't have the budget for this, but our movie's really great. Here's why.
Sometimes if you have a good story, put the work into that letter and spin your story. And you'd be surprised. Yeah.
You sometimes you can get into a film festival, at least submit your film for free. Okay. Let's talk really quick here about post. This is a thing. Obviously I do a little bit of post. Paul, you spend some time in post. So I want to spend 3 minutes on post because I need to get to some distribution questions here. Top level from the director perspective, what do you care most about in the post process, or what do you care about not at all?
It depends on the movie. When you're making a supernatural thriller, the sound mix and the score are your movie's not even scary until those things are there. Right. So like those things matter way more than, can you make the coffee shop sound a little more like a coffee shop when these two people are talking about being, what it's like to be young? Like it's but I will say the edit to me is writing. And it's writing with a partner that's very skilled in that version of writing, in the editor. That is to me, like, I love, it's my favorite part of the whole process because it's way less stressful. And it's free flow creative, and you could try stuff and really experiment, and you're not under that crazy time crunch of production. I think editing is like the reward for having gone through the war of production. I love it. And it's always, and if you could ever work with Sophie Marshall, the editor that I just worked with, if you could ever work with her, like work with her. Oh my God. She is all done remotely because of COVID, but she had developed a technology before the COVID where you could do the whole thing remotely without having to use those expensive services to get sound to kind of come through.
Right.
She came up with a way around it. I mean, there's been articles written about what she came up with to kind of bypass this. And I got to tell you, remote editing is awesome. Like it really is. And so anyways, that was a long-winded answer, but
no worries.
Editing is like it's such a writerly thing to do that it is like it's always going to be like my favorite part of the process.
Yeah, and before we move on from post, I believe it was Kevin Weaver at Blue Line edited Miss Whitelight. Right?
Yeah, Miss Whitelight
and
the Good Catholic. Kevin was great to work with, and it helps so much to have someone. Sorry, when I was shouting out Sophie, shout out to Kevin as well. Somebody who like same sensibility as you, kind of see the world like you can challenge each other, but like you're both trying to make the same movie. It's great to have just another person to kind of do that with.
Okay, I'm very sorry for viewers out there. I'm a monster. We're going to move on from post-production right now, but please, it's in the comments. There are ways to follow up with Paul and myself, or anyone that Creative Solutions team can.
Classic producer trying to save money in posts.
there I go. Okay, quick question. Anonymous attendee asks, from your experience, what eats up the most amount of money from an indie film in pre-production, production, and post? What should you set aside for emergencies? I always do a 5% contingency. If you're amazing, you can get a 10% contingency, but it's 5% is your oops money that you hopefully never have to use, and maybe spend it on like another day of color or something at the end, if that money still exists. What eats up the most amount of money? I mean, it depends. It depends very much on the movie. Paul was just talking about sound effects being key if you're doing a thriller, right? It just sort of depends where your priorities are. As I mentioned before, it's a living, breathing document that tells everyone your priorities. So whatever eats up the most money is what you think should eat up the most money. I know Miss Whitelight was shot on anamorphic. That probably was a little bit expensive. That probably took a little more money than spherical lenses. Sure. And there you go. So that they made a decision there. So I answered that one. Okay, so we have a bunch of distribution things. I'm going to try to crush these all at once here. Remember the strength of the cast. This is a really key thing. It makes the conversations with distributors much easier if you can say X movie starring Judith Light and John Ortiz, et cetera, Roberta, is available worldwide. Can I send you a screening link? So there's a occupation called a sales agent, which I'm a big believer in because I do a little bit of that on the side. So full disclosure. But sales agents, their whole job is to sort of hold your hand through that last 30% of the process. So in exchange for points on your film, they will take your film, they will bring it to various distributors. There's probably 30 all over North America, and they will try to get you the best deal possible. Someone asks, what are the best kinds of distribution deals? Sorry, I don't know who that was, but I'm answering it now. The best kinds of distribution deals are the ones where they're spread amongst a few different companies or one amazing company. Why? You could sell international Blu-ray rights to a company that's good at selling Blu-ray rights. You can sell international rights to someone who has a track record of selling horror in South Korea. North America can go to somebody that's just sort of a film festival darling, and they do some limited theatrical that gets you in the top 10 spot on iTunes if you four-wall 10 theaters. Four-walling just means presenting in a theater. So it depends very much on what kind of project you have, but some keywords you're going to need to know: MG, money guaranteed; TVOD, SVOD, AVOD. TVOD stands for transactional VOD. SVOD stands for subscription, things like Netflix, Amazon; TVOD, things like iTunes, right? AVOD, like IMDb TV, Pluto TV, things like that. Money guaranteed is something that isn't happening very much in independent films. It's the idea that you're going to get a guaranteed $100,000 check once you sign with a distributor. Something to keep in mind is A, that's not happening very much, and B, that money is recoupable up front by them out of your sales. They're giving you $100,000. It's not then the split that we talked about, right? Those equity and net points. It's not just that those kick in. They're now trying to recoup all of their upfront MG money that they gave you. So MG, it is what it is. If that's something that's important to you, then go ahead and do that. Um, Distribution, the most valuable markets on the planet usually for independent films are North America, and then you kind of separate it out into international. International for us, I know we have some folks here from overseas, is anything outside of North America. You can spread your rights out in the way that is most intelligent for your property. I worked on something that was about the World Cup being in Brazil. One of the most valuable properties for that film, you bet it, was in Brazil. So you could carve that out, give that to that one territory, and then sell international rights to worldwide rights to somebody else. If this is a little confusing for you, me rattling on about all these jargony things, this is why I think sales agents are valuable people to help navigate all of this. Even I always get a lawyer, but they can help you with different, Michael, I'm going to go 5 more minutes. I'm sorry, just because I get these questions all the time. They can help you navigate this sort of twisty route here. Filmmakers are taken advantage of by distributors all the time. That's not controversial. That's just something that is true. Things you're going to need to pay attention for: term length, 14-year term. Are you kidding me? If they can't exploit your film in 5 years, then they probably shouldn't go for them, right? So people are out there asking for very crazy terms on movies. And I see a lot of filmmakers get super excited. I have a distribution offer, and sign the first one. Don't give up your last 16 months of work and just sign the first contract that you get. There are other things you can put in there to protect you as a filmmaker. You can require a sales cap, right? So maybe X distributor, you should only spend $20,000 to sell my movie to the planet. That's not a ton of money, but if you put a sales cap on and say you have to write me and I have to give you written permission to spend any more than that amount of money, that's putting a little bit of control, right? If you're saying a sales cap of 100 grand, they can spend 100 grand on dinners on the Riviera in south of France.
And they will.
They will.
Yep.
And you won't see a dime out of that. So you could also put in a clause saying, in a year, if you don't make X dollars, the rights revert back to me, right? You see what kind of things you can stick into contracts to make things more pro filmmaker, which I try to be. And again, unless there are different kinds of indie films that perform better globally, genre titles like science fiction, horror, thrillers, things of that ilk have just a tradition of doing well overseas. Think about this when you're making a film. What is my audience for this? If you can't answer that question, it could be because there's no audience, and then you have a problem. Or you're making something that's too much like something else that everyone's already seen and loved. Just be smart about this last 30%, because in distribution, I see filmmakers stumbling all of the time, and it really bums me out. Again, we put my socials in the comments. Paul's are in there as well. Ask us follow-up questions about this. I'm sure I answered something sort of generally, and you might have something more specific about your project, which is absolutely fine to ask. But if there's one takeaway from the distribution side, don't go signing the first deal you get. Give it real thought. Send it to someone with a legal background, ideally a lawyer if you can afford it, if it's budgeted. And always remember to budget distribution expenses in your main budget. People always forget that to send your movie off, you need things like E&O insurance. You need closed captioning. This is many thousands of dollars. You might need the MPAA to rate your film in order to sign off on this deal. The MPAA charges $5,000 to make your film PG-13. People never put this in your budget. It's always another round of fundraising later. And because it's like the goal always for filmmakers is to make the movie. The goal should be to have people see the movie. And that's the big distinction where I see things sort of fall apart. Paul, sorry not to railroad you there. Do you have any thoughts on distribution getting out, or do you think I covered it there?
I think the conventional wisdom was always get names in your film. That always helps. But nowadays, I mean, the value of stars has gone down drastically. It's just not a star-based setup anymore. I mean, yes, if you're getting the Avengers to be in your indie film, terrific. But in general, like stars, think people that famous actors are not worth that much in selling the movie alone. I think the two most important things you can do, if you a genre, like if you like horror, thriller type stuff, that immediately gets everyone interested. If you've got a horror film, everyone will look at it. It's just a genre that sells well. It sells well everywhere. It's something you can do inexpensively and still do a really good job with.
Yeah.
And the other thing is having it come off of existing IP. So even if it's a short story that got published but no one's heard about, those two things matter tremendously. Original work, like if you've got a great original script, it's more likely that great original script will get you a job writing on someone else's rights that they bought on an existing IP, and they're going to ask you to write that for them based off the original script. They're more likely to do that than actually make your original work. It's getting harder and harder to get original stuff done. So existing IP and genres that do well, which right now is horror and thriller, and that's about it. So like those two things, like if you're thinking about distribution, I'm not saying everyone should go make horror films. Make what you're going to be good at, make what you care about, but those two elements get you way further just on their own.
And there's movies like Ingrid Goes West, Palm Springs, things like that are breakout, that are not necessarily those genre titles. But if you're trying to make it easier on yourself, there's certainly a lot to what Paul is saying. Okay, so I'm going to bring us into our wrap up here with a question that Shay asks: how do you deal with residuals? Do you use a professional payroll company that takes care of that, or do you do it yourself? Write a couple of things down here if you're interested in residuals and getting everyone paid. CAMA, account management companies, media services, entertainment partners. These two can handle payroll aspects. These people handle your waterfall, which is getting money to all of the various people that own different points on your film. That's key. That's it. That's right there. SAG residuals, things like that are handled by entities like that. Okay, I wasn't able to answer everything. Sorry about that, everybody. But as I said, please follow up. Paul, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
What's next for you? Just in a quick bite here. What do you have coming up?
Well, we have we're just finishing up post on my latest film, So Cold the River, which is a supernatural horror film and based on existing IP. How about that?
Following your own advice.
So we're bringing that out in the world. Stay tuned. I don't know what's going on with the world or with the movie, but stay tuned. There'll be news on that in the future. And go to I have a website. It's just www.paulshoulberg.com. I'm teaching screenwriting classes over Zoom starting January. So if you're interested, check it out.
Great. And then I'm going to just leave us with a final thought here is I see people ask the question, how do I get my movie made? I see this question all of the time. And I want to just plant a seed, is that it's 100% possible. People think of it like this crazy, impossible thing. They put it up on this ivory tower, up on a hill that just, it can be done. You're making a thing, you're making a piece of content. One of the reasons indie films are so incredible is because it's a great merging of all sorts of different crafts, from HR to production design, to how light hits a sensor, to the quality of the monitors and the wireless you have on set. And that's what it makes indie films so exciting to me. But because of companies like Sigma, Teradek, Wooden Camera, Small HD, the barrier to entry in terms of just the technology is lower than it has ever been in terms of just spending money to make a thing. This is not just the golden age of television. It can absolutely be the golden age of indie film as well. So a few final words here. You can find Miss White Light nearly everywhere: Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, DirecTV, In Demand, Spectrum, Comcast, Xbox, PlayStation, a bunch of other places. Every time I ask people, do you watch indie films? And they're like, but I want to make indie films. You're not helping the community. Every time you buy a ticket to an indie film or you purchase it online, that's a vote for indie film continuing to exist. So keep that in mind. Again, don't forget to subscribe to Teradek on YouTube. That means we get to do more of these. And that's a vote for continuing to do things like CS Presents. That's it. Paul, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And everyone have a good day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye, everybody.